On a Wednesday morning in January of 1994, Derek Poole stood at the edge of a guardrail on an access road in McDowell County, West Virginia, and looked down into the ravine where his career had just landed. 3 days earlier, a fully loaded Caterpillar 140H motor grader, 65 tons of steel, hydraulics and diesel, had slid off the icy access road during a highway widening project and dropped 15 feet into the hollow below. The machine had gone in nose first, its blade buried in the frozen creek bank, its rear axle pointing up the slope at a 40-degree angle. One track of the ravine wall had given way beneath the back wheels when the driver tried to reverse. Now the whole machine sat wedged between two sandstone outcroppings, with its engine still running for the first 11 minutes before someone had the sense to shut it down. Every hour it sat there, the project lost $8,000 in delays, and the project manager, Derek Poole, had already burned through 3 days and 2 failed recovery attempts. The first company had come from Charleston with a 50-ton rotator truck. They'd spent 6 hours rigging and 2 minutes discovering that the rotator couldn't get stable footing on the access road without risking going into the ravine itself. They'd left without charging. The second company brought a hydraulic pull-lift system anchored to a concrete barrier block and pulled hard enough to move the grader 14 inches before the anchor block shifted and the cable went slack. The grader had settled 3 inches deeper into the creek bank mud. On the third day, Derek called a crane company from Bluefield. The operator drove out, looked into the ravine and said 4 words. "I won't do it." The reach was too far, the slope was too unstable, the liability was too high. He drove away. Derek was standing with his 2 engineers trying to calculate the cost of abandoning the machine in place. The insurance claim, the project delay penalties, the replacement timeline, when he heard a sound from the access road below. A diesel engine, old and heavy and unhurried, coming up the mountain. Then Earl Hutchins' 1952 Autocar DC-75 wrecker came around the bend. Let me tell you about Earl Hutchins, because nothing that happened next makes sense without understanding the man first. Earl was 71 years old and had been running Hutchins Recovery out of Welch, West Virginia for 43 years. His father, Coy Hutchins, had started the business in 1946 with a surplus Army wrecker and a phone line, and had bought the Autocar DC-75 new in 1952 for $6,800, a sum that had taken him 3 years to save. Coy had believed in the autocar the way some men believe in scripture. The DC-75 was built on a cab-over engine platform with a 220-horsepower Hall-Scott gasoline engine, a twin-drum Holmes 750 boom, and a low center of gravity that made it stable on terrain that would have toppled a conventional wrecker. Earl had grown up in the passenger seat of that truck. He'd learned to drive it at 14, learned to rig at 16, learned to read terrain and load angles and soil conditions the way a river pilot reads water. When Coy died in 1971, Earl took over the business and the truck. He updated his equipment over the years, bought a modern rotator in 1983, added a hydraulic underlift unit in 1988, but he never sold the autocar. He maintained it. He started it every month. He knew every sound it made and what each sound meant. The last time he'd used it commercially had been in 1989, pulling a dump truck out of a mine access road collapse that 2 modern wreckers had made worse by trying. He'd driven it home that evening thinking it would probably be the last real job the old truck would run. He'd been wrong before. A man named Gary Lester, who ran the fuel depot at the project site, had called him the night before. Gary had grown up in Welch. He knew Earl. He described the situation, the ravine, the angle, the failed attempts, the access road conditions, and Earl had listened without saying much. Then he'd said he'd come look in the morning. He hadn't told Gary what he was bringing. He just loaded the autocar onto a lowboy at 4 in the morning and drove to McDowell County in the dark. Now the truck came up the access road at 8 miles an hour. its big Hall-Scott diesel turning over with the slow confidence of an engine that has never been asked to hurry. The home's boom rode high above the cab, latticed steel against the gray winter sky. Dual rear wheels bit into the packed snow on the road surface. Earl sat in the cab with the window down despite the cold, listening to the road. Derek Poole heard it coming before he saw it. He turned around. He watched the autocar crest the last bend and come level with the guardrail where he was standing. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that doesn't belong to the situation he's in. "What is that?" he said. His foreman, a man named Ray Coates, looked up from his phone. "That's an Autocar DC-75, early 50s. "A wrecker." "Was, yes." Earl parked the truck, shut the engine down, and climbed out. He was not a large man, medium height, lean, moving with the economy of someone who had spent 70 years not wasting motion. He walked to the guardrail and looked into the ravine without saying anything. He looked for a long time. He looked at the grader's position, the angle of the slope, the sandstone outcroppings, the condition of the creek bank. He looked at where the first recovery company's cable marks were still visible on the grader's frame. He looked at where the anchor block had shifted. Then he turned around and looked at the access road behind the autocar. He looked at the trees on the upper side of the road. He looked at the sight angles and distances the way a man solves a geometry problem in his head. Derek walked over. "I appreciate you coming out, but I have to be honest with you, we've had 2 professional recovery companies and a crane operator look at this. Nobody would take the job. What makes you think?" "How deep is that creek bank mud?" Earl said. Derek blinked. "What?" "The mud, under the grader's front blade. How deep does it go before you hit solid?" We haven't tested it." Earl nodded slowly. "That's part of your problem." He looked back into the ravine. "The other part is that everyone who looked at this thought about pulling. I'm thinking about floating." Derek stared at him. "Floating?" "That front blade is holding the machine's nose down. The nose is what's keeping it wedged between those rocks. You relieve the nose, the machine pivots on its rear axle. Once it pivots, it's not wedged anymore. Then you pull." Earl walked back toward the autocar. "I need 2 hours to rig, then we'll see." Derek looked at his engineers. One of them shrugged. The other one said quietly, "We've got nothing else." "How old is that truck?" Derek called after Earl. 42 years. Derek started to say something, then he stopped. Then he laughed. It was a short, hard laugh that had more desperation in it than contempt, but it landed the same way. Earl didn't turn around. "I'll be ready in 2 hours," he said. "Let me tell you about the rigging, because that's where 4 decades of experience made itself visible." Earl's son Mitchell had followed with a pickup loaded with equipment, chains, snatch blocks, shackles, ground anchors, a come-along, and 2 hand-operated hydraulic jacks rated at 20 tons each. Earl unloaded everything methodically and spent the first 40 minutes not rigging anything. He spent them testing. He drove a soil probe into the creek bank at 7 different points, measuring resistance. He tapped the sandstone outcroppings with a hammer, listening to the tone. He walked the ravine floor carefully, testing each step, and took measurements with a tape. Then he began. He set the autocar back from the guardrail at an angle of about 25 degrees from the grader's centerline offset, like a man approaching a stuck door from the side instead of head-on. He drove 2 earth anchors into the uphill slope with a hand maul, threading a snatch block through each. He ran a cable from the autocar's secondary drum down into the ravine. Around a turning block he'd bolted to the grader's rear frame, and back up to the earth anchors. This cable's job wasn't to pull. It was to hold the grader's rear from sliding sideways when the front moved. Then he did something nobody had thought of. He rigged the 2 hydraulic jacks under the edges of the grader's blade, the part buried deepest in the creek bank mud. He connected a cable from the autocar's main drum to the blade frame at a high angle, running up and back toward the truck. When he applied load to this cable, it would do 2 things simultaneously. Lift the blade slightly while pulling it toward the road. Not brute force. Geometry. Derek's lead engineer had been watching in silence. He walked over when Earl was attaching the main cable. "You're going to lift the nose first," the engineer said. "Break the suction under the blade. Once the blade comes free, the machine pivots. The rear cable keeps it from swinging wild. Then the main drum takes over and walks it up the slope." The engineer paused. "That's actually correct." "I know," Earl said without any edge to it, just a fact. He climbed into the autocar's cab. He started the hall scot. The engine fired on the third crank, always the third crank, 42 years of the same engine starting the same way. He let it warm for 6 minutes. He checked his drum controls. He looked at his cable runs one more time from the cab. Then he put the main drum in gear and began to take up slack. The cable went tight. The Holmes boom flexed at the tip. The autocar's dual rear tires pressed into the road surface, the truck settling slightly on its springs as load came on. For a full minute, nothing moved. Earl held the load steady, didn't increase it, didn't release it, just held it, letting the physics work, letting the load find the path. Then the mud made a sound. A low, tearing groan from 15 feet below the guardrail. The kind of sound that had no mechanical explanation until you understood that clay suction releasing under load has a voice, wet and deep and final. The grader's blade moved, not much, an inch, maybe 2. But it moved. Earl increased drum speed by a fraction. The cable hummed. The blade moved again, 4 inches this time, breaking suction in a section, the way ice calves from a shelf rather than melting all at once. At the 6-minute mark, the blade was clear of the creek bank. The grader's nose came up. The whole machine pivoted on its rear axle exactly as Earl had said it would, rotating toward the road, away from the sandstone outcropping on the left side that had it wedged. Earl shifted to the main pull configuration. Both drums engaged. The autocar leaned forward on its front springs as the load transferred. The dual rear wheels held the road surface without spinning 42-year-old tires with actual tread, because Earl replaced them on schedule. The grader came up the ravine slope in one continuous movement. Slow, 20 feet a minute, steady as a clock. It crested the guardrail line and came onto the access road surface with a sound like an exhale, the whole machine settling onto solid ground, mud streaming off the frame, the blade leaving a long dark trail across the snow. Elapsed time from first drum engagement to grader on the road, 2 hours and 19 minutes. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Ray Coates started clapping. Then the whole crew followed. Someone on the project radio said something that got lost in the noise. Derek Poole stood at the guardrail and didn't move and didn't make a sound. He looked at the grader. He looked at the autocar. He looked at the empty ravine where a $400,000 machine had been sitting for 3 days. Earl shut the main drum down, let the engine idle, and climbed out to begin disconnecting cable. Derek walked over. His face had gone through several changes and had settled on something that wasn't easy to name. Not embarrassment exactly, more like the expression of a man recalculating something fundamental. "Name your price," Derek said. Earl unshackled a snatch block. "Donate to the McDowell County vocational program. They're trying to keep diesel mechanics training going. The mine companies keep cutting the apprenticeship funding." "How much?" Earl thought. "What did 3 days of delay cost you?" Derek looked at the ground. "Close to $250,000. Then give them $20,000. That keeps their program running for 3 years and buys them a decent engine stand." Derek wrote the check against the hood of his truck. Before he tore it off, he said, "I laughed when you drove up." Earl was coiling cable. "I know, I heard you. I was wrong. You'd never seen it done this way. There's a difference between wrong and uninformed." Earl tied off the cable end and looked up. Being uninformed is the easier problem. Let me tell you about the years after, because the story doesn't end on that access road. Derek Poole finished the McDowell County Highway project 4 months later. He framed Earl's bill, a handwritten note on a piece of lined paper charging $0 for labor, and kept it in his desk drawer for the rest of his working life. He told the Chickamauga Creek story at every project kickoff meeting he ran for the next 20 years. He started every meeting the same way. Before we talk about what our equipment can do, let me tell you about what our equipment couldn't do. In 1997, when a culvert replacement project in Wyoming County had a piece of equipment stuck in a situation his engineers described as unrecoverable without aerial support, Derek made one call. Earl arrived the next morning with the autocar. Earl Hutchins retired from active recovery work in 2001. He sold most of the modern equipment but kept the autocar. His son Mitchell maintained it. First of every month, the Halls got fired on the third crank. Mitchell took it to truck shows in the summer. People stopped and stared at the home's boom and the dual drum housing and the hand-lettered name on the door. And Mitchell told the story of the January morning in McDowell County, and they shook their heads the way people do when something sounds impossible but has the evidence right in front of them. Earl Hutchins died in 2008 at the age of 85. Derek Poole drove from Charleston to Welch for the funeral. He told anyone who would listen that Earl had saved his company's reputation at a moment when he had run completely out of other options. A 71-year-old man with a 42-year-old truck did what 3 professional recovery companies couldn't, Derek said. And he told me exactly how before he started. I just wasn't experienced enough to understand what he was describing. The 1952 Autocar DC-75 is in Mitchell Hutchins' equipment shed in Welch. It's been started once a month for over 70 years. Mitchell's daughter has learned to drive it. The Halscott still fires on the third crank. Some tools don't become obsolete. They wait for the problem that proves they were right all along. The engineers said nothing could pull it out. The old man fired up his 1952 autocar, explained the physics in plain language, and pulled it out in 2 hours and 19 minutes. That's what happens when a lifetime of real experience meets the problem that modern equipment forgot how to solve.